By now, you should be equipped with enough knowledge to compose some good melodies, supporting harmonies, bass lines, and drum patterns. We're now going to cover something called counterpoint. This is quite an advanced subject. However, if you've learned everything I've explained in the videos so far, you should have no problem following along. Now, counterpoint occurs when you have two melodies playing at the same time, thus creating a sort of harmony. However, in counterpoint, each melody can be completely independent of one another, and they don't necessarily have to form a chord or a harmony which conforms to a specific interval. In addition, each melody can be performed on a different instrument. For example, this would be layering a lead over a bass line, each of them playing a different melody line independent of one another. Counterpoint is an extremely powerful composition tool, as it allows you to create interest and complexity in your music that would not be possible otherwise. First thing you need to understand is that in order to create counterpoint, you need to have a fixed melody. This is also known as cantus firmus in traditional music theory. This can be thought of as the first melody you compose, which will be used as the basis for our other counterpoint melody. So first, we need a fixed melody. This is what I'm going to quickly create as a MIDI file in Ableton, and then I'll move over and show you that MIDI file that I've created, and that will be our fixed melody. Now that we have our cantus firmus, or fixed melody as I'm going to refer to it in this course, I'm going to talk you through the different types of counterpoint and how we can apply them to our melody. So the first type of counterpoint movement is known as parallel motion. Now this is when the counterpoint melody, the second melody, follows the movement of the fixed melody exactly, meaning that the counterpoint melody moves up or down in pitch the exact same amount of semitones every time the fixed melody changes pitch. This is why we call it parallel motion, because they maintain exactly the same harmonic interval. So if I was to duplicate this here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to input quickly all of the notes in our scale, just so that it's easy for me to create a melody that still fits within our scale. Now that we've created a MIDI file at the beginning with all of the notes in our scale, in order to create my counterpoint, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of the notes other than the first one. This is a parallel motion counterpoint, which I'm going to be demonstrating. So there isn't really much I can do here in terms of creativity. I have to follow the pattern of the fixed melody, the first melody. All I'm going to do is I'm going to take that first note, move it to a different key. I'll try a couple of times until I find one which works with the original melody. I've soloed both tracks. I'm going to start by moving it, let's say, down by 2. Let's have a listen to this. Sounds pretty good to me. They seem to work. Now I'm going to unfold because I need to explain something regarding steps and half steps, or semitones and tones. We need to look at our first fixed melody. Parallel motion means your counterpoint moves the same amount each time a new note is played. So our fixed melody goes from a G3 down to an E3, and this is 1, 2, 3 half steps, which means our second, this is our counterpoint melody, also needs to move 1, 2, 3 half steps. Let me get the grid to show up here so I can easily move it. Also needs to move 3 half steps as well. Now the problem here is that moving from E to this note is a C sharp, and it doesn't exist in the A natural minor scale. If I was to move it down one more, this would no longer be parallel motion. This would be known as similar motion. Similar motion means the pitch of the notes move the same direction, so down in this case, but not by the same amount. So parallel motion would mean I move it here. Similar motion would mean I move it here. Now these are just the terms used in Counterpoint. And I want you to keep that in mind, that when you're composing music, you don't even really need to understand what similar motion or parallel motion or counterpoint even means. You just need to train your ear to hear when things sound good or not, and understand the basics of scales in order to be able to fit your music within the confines of a musical scale. So we've got our counterpoint melody below, going from E3, in this case similar motion, down by 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones, or otherwise known as 2 tones. Sounds pretty good to me. Now, going down again, the original cantus firmus, the fixed melody, is going from an E3 to a C3. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones. So our counterpoint melody has to go down 1, 2, 3, 4. If we were to follow parallel motion. In this case, we're not, because again, we would be out of key. This note doesn't exist in our scale. We could either try A2 or we could try G2. Let's try A2 first, so 3 semitones, and hear what that sounds like. That doesn't sound too bad. Okay. Now, from here, again back to the fixed melody, to here, we're going down 1, 2, 3. Let's see if this works. 1, 2, 3. Again, parallel motion doesn't work in this case. We need to go to similar motion and go either up or down. I'm going to go down in this case. Let's listen to this. I'm going to up the volume of these two. That doesn't sound too bad. Let's try this note. No, I preferred the F, so we're going to stick to the F. Now, this is what counterpoint basically is. It's taking a melody and writing a second melody, potentially even in a different instrument, which works in some way with the original, but also has its own independence. Now, let me quickly demonstrate that this would still work, perhaps even more so if we changed the sound of one of the instruments. So we go to sounds. Let's pick a different lead. Let's go for this one. There you go. Still works absolutely fine with a totally different sound. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to complete this counterpoint using only parallel and similar motion, and then I'm going to play it back to you for you to hear what it sounds like. And then we're going to go into 2 different types of counterpoint called oblique motion and contrary motion. And then we're also going to go into composing a counterpoint melody that combines all the different types of motion into one phrase. So I finished creating the counterpoint melody using only parallel and similar motion. And if we look at them both together, you'll see how the notes are always moving in the same direction, but sometimes by slightly different intervals. Now I'm just going to play it once alongside the chords as well, just to hear how they all fit and sound lovely together. Now I changed the instruments to all pianos, just so you can clearly hear the melodies that are being played. Now, if there's a couple of notes you don't like, such as I think these two probably sound better here, you can go ahead and move them. This is down to ear training. As long as you're in the correct notes in the scale, you should be okay. But still, you can still have combination of notes which don't sound very good together. So the more you do this, the more you'll train your ear, and the easier it will be to identify little details like this. I think perhaps this one as well. And there we have it. That is a counterpoint melody created with parallel and similar motion. Now I want to talk about two other types of counterpoint motions. The first one is oblique motion. Now, this is when the fixed melody changes in pitch, but the counterpoint melody remains stationary in pitch. So, for example, here's my counterpoint. We know that the fixed melody changes pitch from here to here, but if the counterpoint melody stayed at the same note, this would now be called oblique motion. And the idea of counterpoint is combining multiple different types of motion to create something that is interesting. So let's try it in a few different places and let's listen to the result. It may not sound good straight away. We may need to adjust a few things, but let's have a listen. That doesn't sound too bad, but what I have done is I've actually moved the counterpoint melody to play the same notes, so unison, as the fixed melody, which doesn't tend to sound as good, especially when you're using the same instrument. It just sounds like you're playing a single note. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this down here, this down here, this down here. Let's have a listen now. And now we're combining similar motion, parallel motion, and oblique motion over here to get a slightly more interesting counterpoint melody. Now, this can work exceptionally well if the oblique motion occurs more on a bass line and the fixed melody moves more from pitch to pitch on a higher pitched instrument, such as a piano. So if I was to select a bass sound, I'm going to go back to my favorite current synthesizer. Quickly create a bass sound. I may have to change the octave this is playing. Yes, it's currently too high, so I'm going to highlight all of the notes. I'll go there so we can clearly hear it. Let's have a listen to both of them together. Fantastic. What about with the kick drum and the grand piano? Okay. Now, another way we could do this, again using oblique motion, would be to, like I've shown you in a previous video, simply take the chord MIDI, get rid of all of the notes other than the root note of each chord. And then try to copy the pattern of the melody. However, by using oblique motion, we're staying in the exact same key. So the fixed melody moves in pitch, but the counterpoint melody is using oblique motion, therefore staying in the same key. And here's the result. There we have it. We're now using counterpoint to create a bassline melody that works with our chord progression and our fixed melody as well. Now, the final motion I want to talk about is called contrary motion. Contrary motion is when both melodies move in complete opposite directions. This is the most popular counterpoint motion as it creates the greatest impression of two independent melodic lines. For example, I heard a note here where it would sound great to use contrary motion. So if I have one more listen, these last two notes of the first half of the phrase could move up here, then this would be contrary motion because our fixed melody moves down in pitch, whereas our counterpoint moves up in pitch. Let's have a listen to the result. Could even have it sort of go in there in a stepwise motion. So now we could also have contrary motion at the end of every single bar. So have a listen to that. I'm using my ear to try and pick a note that I think sounds good. And there we have it. So let's have a listen to the whole first half of the phrase to hear this contrary motion in play. So using a variety of different motions, you can come up with great counterpoint melodies. Like I said, it doesn't even matter if you remember what the names of the different motions are. As long as you remember that, it's completely up to you how you compose your counterpoint. What matters is that the counterpoint melody works with the fixed melody. And as long as you use your scale notes as guidelines for which notes you've got available to use, and additionally, as long as you listen to the both melodies and make sure they sound good together. If something feels a little bit off or a bit dissonant and you don't like it, adjust one of the notes. Make sure that you get it to a point where it just sounds harmonic. And what I would recommend is if the fixed melody works really well with the chords, the notes you should be adjusting if something doesn't work in your counterpoint is the counterpoint melody, not the fixed melody. So that way your counterpoint will work with the fixed melody, which works with the chords, and you'll have a really harmonically rich passage of music.